A toast to the future, my father announced, raising his crystal champagne glass high above the linen-covered tables of the Oakridge Country Club. I smiled and adjusted the heavy velvet collar of my graduation gown. At 35 years old, I had finally earned my corporate finance law degree, paying every single cent myself while working 60-hour weeks as a paralegal. "We have a surprise gift for the graduate," my mother beamed, pulling a thick manila envelope from her designer handbag. But instead of walking toward my chair, she bypassed me completely and placed it gently into the hands of my younger brother Jason. To Jason, my father declared, his voice booming over the microphone, as the real future of this family legacy. "Use this deed to build your empire, son." The room erupted in applause. No one noticed when I quietly slipped out the back door. They also did not know that 15 minutes later, I would send a single text message that would cause their multi-million-dollar illusion to come crashing down by Monday morning. I am Claire, 35 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. But tonight was the night I finally stopped bleeding and started cutting ties. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who underestimated your worth and stole your spotlight. Growing up in our affluent Connecticut suburb meant privilege to outsiders, but inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness and blatant favoritism permeated every corner. Tonight was supposed to be my night. I had rented the country club hall myself, using my own savings to celebrate passing the bar exam and securing a position at a top-tier corporate law firm. My parents Richard and Brenda had offered to host the dinner. I should have known that their definition of hosting simply meant hijacking the event for their own purposes. I sat at the head table listening to the clinking of expensive silverware against china. My father tapped his glass and stood up. He spoke eloquently about sacrifice, about long nights studying, about the sharp legal mind required to protect a family legacy in today's ruthless economy. My heart actually swelled. For a brief, foolish second, I believed that after 35 years of being the invisible scapegoat, they finally saw me. They finally respected me. I shifted in my seat, ready to stand and accept the envelope my mother was holding. It contained the deed to the family commercial building downtown. For years, they had promised that building would be my inheritance, my safety net for the free legal work and financial shielding I provided them. Instead, she walked right past me. Her expensive perfume wafted over my face as she handed my graduation gift to Jason. Jason was 32 years old and had never worked a real job in his life. He was a serial entrepreneur who had burned through 4 different tech startups, leaving behind nothing but broken contracts and empty bank accounts. Yet to my parents, he was the golden child, the male heir, who could do no wrong. My father looked at Jason with a pride he had never once directed at me. He told the room that Jason was the true visionary and that the commercial building would serve as the collateral he needed for his next big venture. The guests clapped enthusiastically. Aunts and uncles who had not bothered to congratulate me on my law degree were now raising their glasses to Jason. Beside him sat his wife Simone. Simone was 32, a stunning African-American woman, with a taste for luxury that far exceeded her own income. She wore a diamond tennis bracelet that I knew my parents had financed. Simone leaned over the table, her perfectly manicured nails resting near my plate. She offered me a condescending smile that did not reach her eyes. "Do not pout, Claire," she whispered, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Law school is cute, but Jason is building real generational wealth. Maybe he will hire you to review his vendor contracts for minimum wage." She let out a soft, mocking laugh. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I did not throw my drink in her face. Years of navigating their psychological warfare had taught me that reacting only gave them the ammunition they craved. I simply looked at Simone, then at my brother, who was already taking selfies with the deed, and finally at my parents, who were busy accepting congratulations for raising such a brilliant son. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they completely forgot who actually held the keys to their kingdom. I calmly picked up my leather purse, stood up from the table, and walked out. I did not run. I walked with my head held high, navigating through the tables of oblivious guests. The cool night air hit my face as I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the country club. I realized in that moment that 35 years of seeking their approval was the biggest scam of my life. I walked across the dimly lit parking lot to my car. The gravel crunched under my heels, a steady, rhythmic sound that grounded me. I unlocked my sedan, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. I did not turn the key in the ignition. Instead, I reached into the back seat and pulled out my laptop bag. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark interior of the car. I connected to my mobile hotspot and logged into the secure banking portal I had managed for the family for the past 5 years. What my father failed to mention in his boastful speech was that the family had been secretly broke for half a decade. I had used my pristine credit and corporate finance expertise to act as the silent legal guarantor for the estate. I was the only thing shielding that commercial building from immediate foreclosure. They promised me the building in exchange for saving them from bankruptcy. Since they had just publicly gifted the asset to Jason, it was only fair that he inherited the liabilities too. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I navigated to the guarantor withdrawal forms I had prepared weeks ago just in case they tried something exactly like this. With 3 clicks, I officially removed my name and my credit from their accounts. The digital stamp confirmed my withdrawal. Then I picked up my phone. I opened the family group chat where Jason had just sent a picture of himself kissing the manila envelope. I typed out a brief message. Congratulations on the building, Jason. Since you are the future of the legacy, I have officially withdrawn as the silent legal guarantor for the estate. The $3.5 million hidden collateral debt is now entirely yours. Good luck with the bank on Monday. I hit send. I did not wait to see the read receipts. I powered off my phone completely, tossed it into my passenger seat, and started the engine. I drove away from the country club, leaving my toxic family behind in the dark. I went home, poured myself a generous glass of expensive red wine, and went to sleep knowing that the Sunday morning panic was going to be absolutely spectacular. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown apartment. I woke up feeling more rested than I had in a decade. There was no anxiety sitting heavy on my chest, and no lingering guilt about whether I was doing enough to earn my place in the family. I walked into the kitchen, started my espresso machine, and took a deep breath. The rich aroma of coffee filled the air as I finally retrieved my phone from my purse and held the power button. The screen lit up, and almost immediately the device began to vibrate violently. The notification chimes bled into one continuous chaotic sound, bouncing off the quiet walls of my kitchen. 84 missed calls, over 150 text messages. I leaned against the cold marble counter, taking a slow sip of my coffee as I scrolled through the sheer panic I had orchestrated. The messages from my father started around 9 the previous night, right after they likely tried to access the equity line of credit attached to the building. Claire, call me immediately. There is some sort of administrative error on the estate accounts, he had typed. His early messages were completely unaware, trying to maintain his usual commanding tone. But by midnight his tone had shifted from authoritative to furious. How dare you pull a stunt like this on your brother's big night? Fix this glitch right now. You are acting like a spoiled child. My mother took her usual approach, playing the victim, to manipulate my emotions. Claire, please, your father is having chest pains over this stress. Why are you trying to ruin our family? You have always been so jealous of Jason, but this is going too far. Pick up the phone before you do permanent damage to this family. And then there was Jason. His messages were a frantic mess of typos and pure, unfiltered panic. The bank automated system says the account is frozen and the collateral is in default. What did you do? Answer your phone, you crazy witch. My investor meeting is on Monday and I need those funds to secure the lease. Simone is freaking out. Answer me. I did not reply to a single one. I simply set the phone face down on the counter and finished my coffee. The silence in my apartment was beautiful. For 35 years, I had jumped at their every command. If my father called, I answered. If Jason needed a legal document drafted, I stayed up until 3 in the morning doing it for free. But today, they were screaming into the void. I knew, however, that the digital silence would not be enough to keep them away. 45 minutes later, the heavy knocking started. It was not a polite tap. It was the desperate, aggressive pounding of people who had finally lost control of their favorite puppet. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. My father, my mother, and Jason were standing in the upscale hallway looking completely unhinged. Jason was pacing back and forth, pulling at his hair, while my father gripped a stack of papers so hard his knuckles were white. My mother was wringing her hands, looking around the hallway nervously, as if worried my wealthy neighbors would step out and witness their perfect socialite facade crumbling. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open just enough to stand in the frame. I did not invite them in. I stood there in my silk robe, holding my empty coffee mug, projecting a wall of absolute calm. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady and quiet. My father pushed his way forward, shoving the stack of papers toward my chest. "Sign these right now," he demanded, his face red with rage and perfectly mirroring the entitlement he displayed the night before. "You are going to log back into that portal and reinstate your financial guarantee before the banks open tomorrow morning. I do not know what kind of childish tantrum you are throwing, but you are jeopardizing your brother's future, and I will not allow it." I did not take the papers. I let them flutter to the floor between us, scattering across the hardwood. "I am not throwing a tantrum, Richard," I said, using his first name for the first time in my entire life. "I am simply resigning from a volunteer position. You gave the building to Jason. He is the owner now. The bank simply needs his credit and his assets to back the loan." Jason stepped forward, his face pale and sweating profusely. "I do not have $3.5 million in credit, Claire," he practically screamed, his voice cracking. "The bank manager left an emergency voicemail this morning. If your name is not on that guarantor list, they are calling in the entire loan. They are going to seize the building." "That sounds like a real problem for the future of the family legacy," I replied, offering a tight, unsympathetic smile. "You are the visionary, Jason. I am sure you will figure it out." My mother pushed past him, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. She reached out, trying to grab my arm, but I took a step back. "How can you be so selfish?" she cried. "We are your family. We raised you. We paid for your braces when you were 12 years old, and this is how you repay us, by trying to leave us homeless." I looked my mother dead in the eye, feeling a lifetime of resentment finally crystallize into cold, hard truth. "I paid your property taxes for the last 5 years so you would not end up homeless, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that made her flinch. "I paid the utility bills for the country house. I covered the legal fees when Jason crashed his car into a storefront 2 years ago. The braces are paid off." My father looked stunned for a fraction of a second before his anger returned, doubling in intensity. "You owe us," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "That building is family property. It belongs to all of us." "No, it was supposed to be my property," I corrected him, locking eyes with him until he looked away. "That was the deal we made. I use my corporate salary and my pristine financial record to shield your sinking ship from the bank, and in return the building comes to me. I spent 5 years fixing your careless mistakes, keeping this family afloat while you played rich. But you could not help yourselves. You just had to hand the prize to your golden boy in front of everyone to make yourselves look important. So now he gets the prize and all the hidden debt that comes with it." "You are bluffing," Jason stammered, looking like a terrified child rather than a grown man. "Simone is going to leave me if this startup falls through. She already threatened to walk out this morning when the cards declined. You have to fix this, Claire. You are my sister. Simone is going to leave you anyway once she realizes you are entirely broke and have been funding her lifestyle with ghost money," I said without missing a beat. "You have exactly 24 hours to figure out how to satisfy the bank before the foreclosure process begins. I suggest you start liquidating whatever assets you have left. Have a lovely Sunday." I stepped back and firmly shut the heavy oak door right in their faces. The deadbolt clicked into place with a satisfying finality. The muffled sounds of my father shouting, my mother sobbing, and Jason kicking the bottom of the door bled through the wood for a few minutes before they finally realized I was not going to open it again. Their footsteps echoed down the hall as they retreated in total defeat. I walked back to my kitchen, picked up my phone, and called my real estate broker. The heavy weight I had carried for 35 years was gone. I did not just survive their toxicity, I had legally and financially dismantled it, and my life was finally my own. Monday morning arrived with a crisp breeze rolling off the city skyline. I put on my favorite tailored navy suit, secured my hair in a sleek knot, and walked into the gleaming glass lobby of my new corporate law firm. This was supposed to be my grand entrance into the next chapter of my career as a senior associate. I stepped out of the elevator onto the 40th floor, ready to grab a coffee from the espresso bar and review my morning briefs. But as the silver doors slid open, my perfect morning shattered. Simone was pacing in the center of the reception area. She was wearing a trench coat tightly belted over her expensive workout clothes, looking frantic and completely out of place against the backdrop of polished marble and modern art. The moment her eyes locked onto me, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. She marched past the bewildered receptionist, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my chest. "You thought you could just ruin my life and go to work like nothing happened," she yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. Several paralegals and junior partners stopped in their tracks, turning their heads to watch the spectacle. I felt a brief flash of embarrassment, but I quickly shoved it down. Panic was exactly what she wanted. I stood my ground, holding my leather briefcase tightly against my side. "Simone, lower your voice," I said evenly, keeping my tone strictly professional. "This is a law firm, not your country club locker room. If you want to speak to me, we can go outside. I am not going anywhere, you bitter, jealous spinster," she screamed, stepping so close I could smell her expensive floral perfume mingling with her nervous sweat. "You are going to fix this right now. You are going to sign those guarantor papers and give Jason his building back. You are just furious because no man wants you, and you cannot stand to see your brother happily married and building real wealth. You are trying to sabotage his tech company out of pure spite." The receptionist, a young woman in her 20s, nervously picked up her desk phone. "Do you need me to call building security, miss?" she asked, looking between me and Simone with wide eyes. "Yes, please call them," I replied calmly, not breaking eye contact with my sister-in-law. "Have them come up to the 40th floor." Simone laughed, a harsh, grating sound that bordered on hysterical. "Call them," she challenged, throwing her arms up. "Let them come. Let them see exactly what kind of person this firm just hired. I will march right into the corner offices and tell your senior partners exactly what you are doing. I will tell them you are committing financial abuse against your own elderly parents. I will tell them you manipulated your way into their trust accounts and stole their retirement security just because you are a hateful, lonely woman. I will not leave this floor until you sign the reinstatement forms, Claire. I am family, and you owe us." She stood there, chest heaving, believing she had played the ultimate trump card. She thought the threat of public humiliation would break me. She thought I would drag her into an empty conference room and sign away my financial freedom just to avoid a scandal on my first day. But Simone was playing checkers while I had been playing chess for 5 years. I did not beg her to stop. I did not try to explain myself to the gathering crowd of my new colleagues. I simply set my leather briefcase on the edge of the reception desk, snapped open the brass locks, and reached inside. I pulled out a sleek black folder. It was a dossier I had compiled over the weekend after doing a deep dive into Jason and his so-called business ventures. I stepped forward and firmly pressed the folder against Simona's chest, forcing her to grab it before it fell to the floor. "Before you try to ruin my career, Simone, you might want to look at where your husband's last $500,000 of startup capital actually went," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady volume that only she could fully hear. She looked down at the folder, then back up at me, her confident facade wavering for the first time. "What is this?" she snapped, gripping the cardboard edges. "That is a complete audit of Jason's financial transactions for the last 8 months," I explained, watching the color slowly drain from her face. "He has not been building a tech company, Simone. He has not hired a single developer or signed a single software contract. He took all of that money and dumped it into fraudulent offshore crypto exchanges, trying to day trade his way to a fortune. He lost every single penny by February." "You are lying," she whispered, but her hands were already trembling as she flipped open the cover. She stared at the bank statements, the wire transfers, the glaring red deficit lines. "I am not finished," I continued, leaning in slightly. "Since he lost all of his venture capital, he needed a way to keep up appearances so you would not find out. Turn to page 4. Simone mechanically turned the pages. She gasped. It was a sharp breath that seemed to get stuck in her throat. "That is a second mortgage on the Lake Tahoe vacation home," I said, spelling it out for her. "The home your grandmother left you. Jason forged your signature on the equity loan documents 3 months ago. He drained the equity in your property to pay off his crypto debts and keep funding your lavish lifestyle. That diamond tennis bracelet you were wearing at my graduation party was bought with your own stolen money." She stared at the forged signatures, her eyes darting frantically across the legal documents. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant, demanding woman who had stormed into my office just 3 minutes ago was gone. In her place was a broken, betrayed wife, realizing she was tied to a sinking anchor. Jason needed that commercial building because it was the last asset left to leverage, I told her softly. But I took it off the table. "He is completely broke, Simone, and now, because of his fraud, so are you." The elevator doors chimed, and 2 large security guards stepped out onto the floor. They approached us cautiously, zeroing in on Simone. "We need you to come with us, ma'am," one of the guards said, reaching out to guide her by the elbow. Simone did not fight them. She did not scream or hurl any more insults. She simply clutched the black folder to her chest, her eyes wide and unseeing as the guards escorted her toward the elevator bank. She looked completely hollowed out. I watched the doors slide shut, sealing her fate. I turned back to the reception desk. The lobby was dead silent. My new colleagues were still standing there, trying to process the intense, brief drama they had just witnessed. I offered the receptionist a polite, professional smile. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, smoothing the front of my jacket. "It seems my sister-in-law received some unfortunate personal news. Could you please let the managing partner know I am ready for our morning meeting?" The receptionist nodded quickly, picking up her phone. "Yes, right away," she stammered. I picked up my briefcase and walked toward my new office. The smear campaign they had planned was dead on arrival. Simone was no longer an ally to my parents or my brother. She was a ticking time bomb, and Jason was about to take the full force of the explosion. The golden child was finally going to face the real world, and there was absolutely nothing my parents could do to save him now. The rest of my Monday went exactly as I had planned. I settled into my spacious corner office, overlooking the city, and dove into my corporate finance portfolios. The work was complex and demanding, but it felt incredibly rewarding. Nobody was asking me to do it for free. Nobody was expecting me to sacrifice my own well-being for their benefit. For the first time in my professional life, I was being valued for my expertise. By Wednesday, the fallout from my lobby encounter had reached a fever pitch. My phone, which I had unblocked strictly to monitor their inevitable meltdown, was buzzing with a new kind of desperation. Simone had apparently gone home and confronted Jason. According to the frantic voicemails my mother left me, Simone had packed her bags, taken her jewelry, and moved into a luxury hotel demanding a divorce. Jason was sleeping on my parents' couch, and the bank was threatening to initiate foreclosure proceedings by Friday if the $3.5 million debt was not secured. Then, on Thursday morning, the tone of their communications suddenly shifted. The aggressive demands and guilt trips stopped. Instead, I received a surprisingly calm, polite email from my father. Claire, we know things have gotten out of hand, he wrote. We are all under a lot of stress, but you are still our daughter, and we want to fix this. Please meet us for dinner tonight at the downtown steakhouse. Just the three of us. No Jason, no fighting. We just want to talk and find a way to heal this family. I stared at the email on my monitor. The sudden shift from hostility to diplomacy was unnatural. My parents did not know how to apologize, and they certainly did not know how to heal. They only knew how to manipulate. They were terrified, and when cornered animals are terrified, they set traps. I knew this reconciliation dinner was a setup, but I also knew I had to end this completely. I could not have them lingering on the edges of my life, waiting for a moment of weakness. I had to face them one last time and sever the cord permanently. I replied to the email with a single word. Agreed. Then I spent my lunch hour preparing for war. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out the extensive audit files I had built over the years. I gathered every piece of evidence, every hidden transaction, and every lie my father had buried in the family trust. I placed them neatly into a fresh folder. I was not walking into a family dinner. I was walking into a courtroom, and I was going to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown apartment. I opened my eyes and stared at the smooth white ceiling. For the first time in 35 years, I woke up without a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. There was no lingering anxiety about whether I was doing enough to earn my place in the family. There was no mental checklist of legal documents I needed to draft for my father, or unpaid bills I needed to cover for my brother. I stretched my legs under the expensive linen sheets. I bought these sheets myself. I bought this apartment myself. Every single thing in my life was earned through late nights and relentless hard work. I threw off the covers and walked out to the kitchen. My apartment was completely silent, save for the quiet hum of the refrigerator. It was a stark contrast to the absolute chaos I knew was unfolding across town. I walked over to the kitchen island where I had abandoned my phone the night before, next to an empty wine glass. It was a sleek, black rectangle sitting perfectly still. I reached out and pressed the power button on the side. The screen flashed the white Apple logo, and then the digital dam broke. The device practically danced across the granite countertop. It vibrated violently, the notification chimes bleeding into one continuous chaotic sound. Ding, ding, ding. The barrage was relentless. I leaned against the counter watching the screen light up with their names. 84 missed calls, over 150 text messages. I picked up the phone feeling the frantic buzzing against my palm. I opened the family group chat and began scrolling through the timeline of their meltdown. It was beautifully documented, a perfect digital record of their arrogance turning into sheer terror. At 11:45 the night before, my father had sent the first message. His tone was exactly what I expected, arrogant, dismissive, and commanding. Claire, call your father immediately. There is some sort of administrative error with the estate accounts. I almost laughed out loud. An administrative error. That was what he always called my financial boundaries. Whenever I refused to transfer money or sign a document, he called it a glitch or an error, assuming I would just fall in line and fix it. By midnight, his tone had sharpened into anger. I do not know what kind of childish prank you are pulling, because you are upset about the graduation party, but you need to fix this glitch right now. Log in and authorize the accounts. You are acting like a spoiled brat. But by 2 a.m, the reality of my text message had finally set in. My father had clearly tried to call the 24-hour banking hotline. His next text was devoid of his usual authority. The bank automated system says the commercial line of credit is frozen and the collateral is in default. What did you do? Answer your phone right now. I scrolled down to my mother's messages. Brenda took her usual approach, bypassing logic and going straight for emotional manipulation. Claire, please, your father is having chest pains over this stress. Why are you trying to ruin our family? You have always been jealous of Jason, but this is going too far. Pick up the phone before you do permanent damage to this family. I read her words and felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no fear. 10 years ago, a text like that would have sent me into a panic. I would have called a taxi, rushed to their house, and begged for forgiveness. I would have signed anything they wanted just to stop my mother's manufactured tears, but the chest pain routine was old. She had used the exact same line when I refused to co-sign Jason's first luxury car lease. The emotional manipulation that used to control me was completely powerless now. I saw right through the performance. Then there were Jason's texts. They were a frantic mess of typos and pure unfiltered panic. I could piece together exactly what had happened. He had obviously taken his wife Simone and their friends out to a high-end luxury club to celebrate his new status as the family visionary. He probably tried to open a massive bar tab using the estate credit card, and the bartender had declined it in front of everyone. "Answer your phone, you crazy witch." His first text read, sent at 1 in the morning. "The bank says the guarantor withdrew." What does that mean? My investor meeting is on Monday, and I need those funds to secure the lease. Simone is screaming at me in the car. "Answer me." His subsequent messages were just strings of question marks and threats to sue me. Sue me. I was a corporate finance lawyer. I knew the law inside and out, and I knew he had absolutely no legal leg to stand on. He was holding the deed to a building that carried $3.5 million in hidden debt, and without my pristine credit score acting as the safety net, the bank was going to swallow him whole. I did not reply to a single message. I locked the screen and set the phone face down on the marble counter. I walked over to my high-end espresso machine and began my morning ritual. I measured out the fresh espresso beans, listening to the loud mechanical whir of the grinder. The noise was loud and grounding, drowning out the lingering thoughts of my toxic family. I packed the dark grounds, pulled the shot, and watched the rich liquid pour into my ceramic mug. I steamed the milk, pouring it slowly, until it formed a perfect layer of foam on top. The aroma filled the kitchen. It smelled like freedom and absolute peace. I took a slow sip, letting the hot coffee warm my chest. I knew the digital silence would not be enough to keep them away. They were not going to stop at text messages and voicemails. They knew exactly where I lived. The gated entry downstairs was secure, but Jason knew how to tailgate residents into the parking garage. He had done it before when he needed me to bail him out of a traffic ticket. They were coming, and they were going to demand a face-to-face confrontation. I finished my coffee, washed the mug in the sink, and walked to my bedroom. I was not going to hide in my pajamas. I opened my closet and pulled out a crisp, white, tailored blouse and a pair of dark navy trousers. I dressed carefully, buttoning my shirt and securing my hair back into a sleek, polished knot. I applied a light coat of makeup. If I was going to face a firing squad, I was going to look exactly like the ruthless corporate attorney they had unknowingly created. I slipped on my watch, a silver timepiece I had bought for myself to celebrate passing the bar exam. It was 7:45 in the morning. I walked out to the living room, pulled open the heavy curtains, and looked down at the quiet city street below. I stood there feeling completely calm, waiting for the inevitable ambush. It started with the intercom buzzer ringing from the lobby downstairs, a long, continuous, irritating sound that I completely ignored. 10 minutes later, the heavy pounding began on my actual front door. Jason had tailgated someone into the parking garage, just as I had predicted. The knocking was not polite. It was the desperate, aggressive pounding of people who had finally lost control of their favorite financial puppet. I walked away from the window and headed toward the foyer. I stopped in front of the door and looked through the brass peephole. My father Richard was red in the face, his tie loosened and his collar wrinkled. He looked like he had been sweating for hours. My mother Brenda was standing behind him, clutching her designer purse like a shield, her makeup smeared underneath her eyes. Jason was pacing back and forth in the hallway, chewing furiously on his thumbnail. They looked completely disheveled and frantic. It was a staggering contrast to the arrogant, untouchable family that had toasted to their own greatness just 12 hours earlier. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door wide open. I did not invite them inside. I stood firmly in the center of the doorway, blocking their entrance. Dressed in my tailored navy trousers and crisp white blouse, I looked like I was stepping into a corporate boardroom. I felt like it too. My father immediately tried to push his way past me, but I held my ground, placing my hand on the doorframe. He stopped, shocked that I did not physically yield to him. He thrust a crumpled piece of paper toward my chest. "Sign this right now," he demanded, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet upscale hallway. "You are going to log into your laptop, and you are going to reinstate your financial guarantee." "This childish tantrum ends today, Claire." I looked down at the paper. It was a standard bank authorization form. He must have printed it at a 24-hour business center in a sheer panic. I did not take it from him. I kept my hands folded neatly in front of me. "Good morning to you too, Richard," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. His face tightened with rage. "Do not get smart with me," he snapped. "Family helps family. You know that. We have always taught you that. You are being a petty, jealous sister just because Jason is getting the building instead of you. You have a great job at a new law firm now. You do not need that property. Jason needs it to launch his company. You are trying to sabotage his entire future out of pure spite because you were not the center of attention at your own party." I stared at him, letting his ridiculous words hang in the air. He was trying to gaslight me right there in the hallway. He wanted me to believe that protecting myself from $3.5 million in fraudulent debt was somehow an act of petty jealousy. The bank manager called me at 8 in the morning. "Claire," Jason yelled, stepping forward and pointing a shaking finger at me. "They are threatening to freeze all my accounts. Simone is threatening to pack her bags and leave me if the funds do not clear by tomorrow. You have to fix this. You cannot do this to me. I am the visionary of this family, and you are ruining my venture." "If you are such a visionary, Jason, you should be able to secure a commercial loan without your sister's credit score," I replied smoothly. A real entrepreneur does not need his sister to secretly underwrite his entire existence. You wanted the building. You have it. Enjoy the debt that comes attached to the foundation. My mother pushed her way to the front, shoving Jason aside. Her eyes were wide and manic. "How can you be so cruel?" she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the walls. "We raised you. We gave you everything you have. We paid for your braces when you were 12 years old, and this is how you repay us, by trying to ruin your brother and leave us all humiliated in front of the bank." The sheer absurdity of her argument almost made me laugh. She was equating $2,000 in childhood orthodontics to a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate liability. I looked my mother dead in the eye, feeling a lifetime of resentment finally crystallize into cold, hard truth. "And I paid your property taxes for the last 5 years, so you would not end up homeless, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to an icy register that made her physically flinch. "I paid the utility bills for the country house. I covered the legal fees when Jason crashed his car into a storefront 2 years ago. I shielded this entire family from bankruptcy, while you bought designer clothes and hosted dinner parties to pretend you were still rich. The braces are paid off." Brenda opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked at Richard for help, but my father was staring at me as if he was seeing a stranger. For my entire life they had relied on my guilt and my desperate need for their affection to keep me compliant. They thought they could treat me like a disposable asset indefinitely. They never factored in the possibility that I would finally wake up and stop caring. "You owe us," Richard bellowed, trying to regain his dominant posture. He stepped closer, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me. "That building is family property. It belongs to the legacy. You are legally obligated to support this family." "Actually, I am a corporate finance lawyer," I corrected him without stepping back. "I am legally obligated to do absolutely nothing for you. You publicly gifted the asset to Jason. The bank simply requires the new owner to carry the burden of the mortgage. It is standard operating procedure." There is no glitch. There is no administrative error. There is only the reality of your own financial incompetence. You are bluffing, Jason stammered, looking like a terrified child rather than a grown man preparing to build an empire. You would never let the bank take the building. You worked too hard to save it. I did work hard to save it, I agreed. I saved it because it was supposed to be mine. That was the deal we made 5 years ago. I keep the ship from sinking, and the building becomes my inheritance. But you three decided to change the terms of the agreement last night. You handed my reward to someone who has never worked a day in his life. So I am simply walking away from the table. The deal is off. Richard slammed his fist against the doorframe, making a loud cracking sound. You will sign this paper, Claire, he roared, his face turning purple. I am your father, and I am ordering you to sign it. If you hit my property again, I will call the police and have you escorted out of the building for trespassing. I said, my voice dangerously calm. I do not take orders from you anymore. You have 24 hours to figure out how to satisfy the bank before the foreclosure process begins. I suggest you start liquidating whatever assets you have left. I stepped back and firmly grabbed the heavy oak door. My mother burst into loud, dramatic sobs, burying her face in her hands. Jason looked like he was going to be physically sick right there on my welcome mat. My father just stood there, his arms still raised, his expression frozen in a mix of fury and utter defeat. He finally realized that he had no leverage left. The invisible strings he used to control me were completely severed. Have a lovely Sunday, I said. I pushed the door shut right in their faces. The heavy deadbolt clicked into place with a loud, satisfying finality. I stood in the foyer for a moment listening. The muffled sounds of my father cursing, my mother sobbing, and Jason kicking the bottom of the door bled through the wood. They lingered for a few more minutes, hoping I would crack, hoping I would open the door and apologize. But I did not move. I just listened to the beautiful sound of their desperation until their footsteps finally echoed down the hall and faded away completely. I turned to walk back toward my bedroom when I heard the frantic slap of leather shoes sprinting back down the polished corridor. The heavy knocking resumed, but this time it was not angry or demanding. It was erratic, weak, and desperate. Claire, please open the door, Jason begged, his voice muffled through the heavy oak. They went down to the parking garage. It is just me. Please, you have to explain this to me. I do not understand what is happening. I walked back to the door, but I did not touch the deadbolt. I leaned my shoulder against the cool wood and looked at his distorted, panicked face through the peephole. He was sweating profusely, and his eyes were wide with terror. He looked nothing like the arrogant golden child who had smirked at me from the head table the night before. I am not opening the door, Jason, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the wood. But since you are the proud new owner of the downtown commercial property, I suppose you deserve a proper financial handover. You need to know exactly what our parents handed you in that manila envelope. What do you mean? He stammered, pressing his hands against the door. The building is completely paid off. Dad said it was a free and clear asset. He said I could leverage it for a $2 million startup loan. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Dad lied to you, Jason. He has been lying to everyone for half a decade. 5 years ago, his investment firm took a massive hit. He was completely leveraged. To keep up the facade of the wealthy Connecticut socialite family, to keep paying for your luxury car leases and mother's country club memberships, he took out secret equity lines on every single property they owned. He drained the family trust. They were exactly 90 days away from total foreclosure and absolute public humiliation. I heard a sharp intake of breath from the hallway. Jason was completely silent, listening to the reality of his perfect childhood shatter. They came to me crying and begging. I continued, my tone clinical and detached. I spent 3 solid weeks auditing their accounts. It was a bloodbath. They were drowning in $3.5 million of toxic debt. I used my corporate finance expertise to consolidate those loans. I restructured the debt under the commercial building to save the family home. But the bank would not approve the restructure based on Dad's ruined credit. They needed a pristine financial guarantor to underwrite the entire estate. You, he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Me, I confirmed. I put my name, my salary, and my flawless financial record on the line to shield this family from bankruptcy. In exchange, Richard and Brenda signed a binding legal agreement. Upon my graduation from law school, the commercial building would be transferred directly to me. It was my payment for saving them. It was my safety net. Then why did they give it to me? Jason asked, his voice cracking with a mix of confusion and rising panic. If they legally promised it to you, why did they hand the deed to me in front of hundreds of people? Because they are addicts, Jason, I explained softly. They are addicted to appearances. Gifting a multi-million-dollar empire to their male heir made them look like titans of industry. Gifting it to the daughter they have always treated like a second-class citizen did not fit their narrative. They assumed I was so desperate for their love that I would just smile, swallow my pride, and continue being the silent legal shield while you took all the credit and the profits. They thought I would never have the spine to walk away and let the ship sink. But I did walk away, I told him. Last night when I withdrew as the guarantor, I triggered a default clause. The bank now requires the current owner of the deed to prove they can cover the liability. That is you, Jason. How much is it? He gasped. His breathing was starting to grow shallow and rapid. Claire, tell me exactly how much I need to fix this. The principal debt is $3.5 million, I stated cleanly. But because you do not have the credit history to support that, the bank will demand an immediate capital injection to prevent foreclosure. They are going to ask you for $500,000 in cash by Monday morning. If you cannot produce it, they will seize the building and freeze every single account associated with your name. I cannot breathe, Claire, he wheezed. Through the peephole, I watched him slide slowly down the door until he was sitting on the floor of the hallway, clutching his chest. I do not have $500,000. I do not even have $50,000. The venture capital I raised for my last startup is gone. It is all gone. I know it is gone, Jason, I said, showing no sympathy. And once Simone realizes it is gone, she is going to pack her designer bags and leave you with nothing but the legal fees. You thought they were gifting you an empire last night. They were actually handing you a ticking time bomb, and you were too arrogant to look inside the box before you took a bow. Please, you have to log back in, he begged, his voice dissolving into a pathetic whimper. His breathing was ragged now, full-blown hyperventilation. I can hear him gasping for air, his hands clawing weakly at the bottom of the door. Call the bank. Tell them it was a mistake. I will give you the deed back. I swear to God, Claire, I will give it back today. You cannot give it back. I replied, my voice perfectly calm against the backdrop of his panic attack. The transfer was legally finalized on Friday. Dad made sure of it, so the surprise would be authentic for the party. The debt is yours now. The legacy is yours. Enjoy the empire. I pushed myself away from the door. I did not care that he was hyperventilating on the floor of my hallway. I did not care that his perfect life was disintegrating in real time. For the first time in my existence, I was completely free of their burden. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door, leaving the pathetic sounds of the golden child far behind me. I had a busy week ahead of me at my new law firm, and I needed to prepare my wardrobe for Monday morning. Monday morning arrived with a sharp clarity that felt entirely new. I stood in front of my full-length mirror, inspecting my reflection. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal gray suit that I had purchased specifically for this day. It was my first official day as a senior associate at one of the most ruthless and respected corporate finance law firms in the city. The fabric draped perfectly, projecting authority and absolute control. I pulled my hair back into a tight, polished chignon and applied a bold red lipstick. For 35 years, I had dulled my own shine to make sure my brother could stand in the spotlight. Today, the spotlight was mine, and I was not going to apologize for it. I grabbed my leather briefcase and headed out the door. The commute into the financial district was usually a stressful blur of traffic and honking horns, but today I enjoyed every single second of it. I listened to the quiet hum of my car engine, feeling a deep sense of peace. The frantic voicemails from my parents and Jason had finally stopped late Sunday evening. I assumed they had exhausted themselves, or perhaps they were busy tearing their house apart, looking for something else to sell. Either way, their silence was a luxury I fully intended to get used to. I parked in the secure underground garage of the towering glass skyscraper that housed my new firm. I rode the private elevator up to the 40th floor, watching the city shrink beneath me through the glass walls. When the silver doors slid open, I stepped out into a lobby that screamed generational wealth and corporate power. The floors were polished white marble, the walls were paneled in rich mahogany, and a massive modern chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling. It was an intimidating environment, designed to make clients feel small and lawyers feel invincible. I walked toward the reception desk, offering a warm smile to the young woman sitting behind the massive granite counter. "Good morning, I am Claire," I said confidently. "It is my first day." The receptionist smiled back warmly, but before she could even check her computer screen, a sharp, aggressive voice cut through the quiet elegance of the lobby. "Did you really think you could just ignore me, Claire?" I turned around slowly, my briefcase gripped loosely in my hand. Sitting in one of the plush leather waiting chairs was Simone. She looked completely out of place in the sterile corporate environment. She was wearing a beige designer trench coat, tightly belted over expensive athleisure wear, her hair perfectly styled, but her eyes wild and frantic. She had a massive designer tote bag resting on her lap, and she was gripping the handles so tightly her knuckles were white. The moment our eyes met, she stood up and marched across the marble floor, her heels clicking loudly and aggressively. I felt a brief flicker of surprise, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, analytical calm. Simone was Jason's enabler. She was a woman who had built her entire identity around the illusion of wealth that my brother projected. She loved the country club dinners, the luxury vacations, and the status of being married to a tech entrepreneur. The reality that she was married to a broke fraud who relied on his sister to pay the bills must have hit her hard. "Simone, what are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice low and strictly professional. "This is my place of employment. It is highly inappropriate for you to be here." "Inappropriate," she scoffed, her voice rising dramatically. She wanted an audience. She wanted to cause a scene. "Do not talk to me about inappropriate. You completely destroyed my husband's business venture on the night of your graduation party out of pure spite. You are trying to bankrupt us." Several junior associates who were waiting near the elevator bank turned their heads to look. A senior partner walking out of a conference room paused his steps. The lobby was designed to be quiet, so Simona's shrill voice carried perfectly, bouncing off the marble walls. I knew exactly what she was doing. It was the same tactic my parents used: public humiliation. If she made a big enough scene on my first day, she thought I would cave to the pressure to avoid a scandal. She thought I would drag her into an empty office and sign whatever she wanted just to make her go away. "Lower your voice, Simone," I said evenly, my expression entirely unbothered. "You are embarrassing yourself." "I am not embarrassed," she yelled, stepping so close to me I could smell the heavy floral perfume she always wore. "You are the one who should be embarrassed. Everyone in this office needs to know exactly what kind of person they just hired. They need to know that they hired a bitter, jealous spinster who is actively trying to ruin her own brother's life." She gestured wildly with her hands pointing at me while looking around the lobby to ensure she had everyone's attention. The receptionist looked terrified, her hand hovering over the desk phone. "That is right," Simone continued, her voice dripping with venom. "You are 35 years old and you are completely alone. No husband, no children, no prospects. You spend all your time buried in legal documents because absolutely nobody wants to come home to you. And because your life is so empty and miserable, you cannot stand the fact that Jason is happy. You cannot stand that he has a beautiful wife and a successful future. So you decided to throw a temper tantrum and cut off the family accounts just to make him suffer." I stood perfectly still, letting her words wash over me. A few years ago, those insults would have pierced right through my chest. My family had always weaponized my single status. They had always painted my dedication to my career as a tragic consequence of being unlovable. But standing there in my bespoke suit holding a briefcase full of corporate accounts, I realized how pathetic her insults truly were. She was attacking my personal life because she had absolutely no financial or logical leverage. "Are you finished?" I asked, my tone bored and slightly condescending. "I am not leaving this building until you sign the reinstatement papers," she demanded, crossing her arms over her chest. "Jason is at the bank right now, begging the manager for an extension. You are going to log into your portal right here in this lobby, and you are going to give him his building back. If you do not, I am going to march into the managing partner's office and tell him you are committing financial abuse against your elderly parents. I will tell them you manipulated your way into the family trust and stole their retirement security. I will ruin your reputation before you even bill your first hour." She stared at me, chest heaving, believing she had played the ultimate trump card. She thought the threat of a ruined career would break me. She thought I was the same terrified, people-pleasing girl who used to write Jason's college essays for him, so my parents would not scream at me. But Simone did not understand the environment she had just walked into. She thought she was in an episode of a reality television show, throwing drinks and trading insults. She did not realize she had just walked into a high-stakes corporate arena and brought a plastic knife to a gunfight. I did not beg her to lower her voice. I did not frantically look around at my new colleagues and try to explain myself. I did not show a single ounce of fear or embarrassment. I simply maintained eye contact with my furious sister-in-law and offered her a slow, chilling smile. "I think you misunderstand the situation, Simone," I said, my voice steady and deadly calm. I reached over to the reception desk and placed my leather briefcase firmly on the granite counter. I unclasped the brass locks with a sharp, satisfying click. Simone watched my hands, her arrogant expression faltering just a fraction as she tried to calculate my next move. I was about to give her the financial reality check of a lifetime, and I was going to do it with an audience. I lifted the heavy leather flap of my briefcase and reached inside the meticulously organized compartments. I bypassed the thick legal briefs I had prepared for my morning meetings and pulled out a sleek black folder. It was the financial dossier I had compiled over the weekend. I knew Simone or someone from the family would eventually come for me, so I had prepared a parting gift just for her. Before I addressed her directly, I looked past Simone to the receptionist sitting behind the granite counter. "Please go ahead and call building security," I instructed, my voice projecting clearly across the quiet, elegant lobby. "Tell them we have a trespasser who is currently threatening a firm employee. Have them come up to the 40th floor immediately." Simone scoffed, planting her hands firmly on her hips. "Call them," she challenged, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "Let them come. Let them see the kind of fraud they just hired. I am not leaving this floor until you sign the guarantor papers, Claire. I will stand right here and tell everyone who walks off that elevator what you did to your own parents. I will make sure the managing partner knows you are a vindictive, manipulative spinster." I stepped away from the reception desk and closed the distance between us. I did not hand her the black folder. I pressed it firmly against her chest, forcing her to instinctively grab the cardboard edges before it fell to the polished marble floor. "Before you try to ruin my career, Simone, you might want to look at where your husband's last $500,000 of startup capital actually went," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady volume that only she could fully hear. She looked down at the dark folder and then back up at me. Her confident, unyielding facade wavered just slightly. "What is this?" She snapped, her fingers gripping the paper. "That is a complete forensic audit of Jason's financial transactions for the last 8 months," I explained, watching the arrogant fire in her eyes begin to extinguish. "He has not been building a tech company, Simone. He has not hired a single software developer or signed a single vendor contract. He took all of that venture capital and dumped it into fraudulent offshore crypto exchanges, trying to day trade his way to a massive fortune. He lost every single penny by February." "You are lying," she whispered, but her hands were already trembling visibly as she flipped open the cover. She stared down at the highlighted bank statements, the wire transfer receipts, and the glaring red deficit lines crossing the pages. I am not finished. I continued leaning in closer so she could hear every single word. Since he lost all of his capital, he needed a quick way to keep up appearances so you would not find out he was broke. Turn to page 4. Simone mechanically turned the pages. When she saw the document, her breath hitched. It was a sharp, shallow gasp that seemed to get stuck in the back of her throat. That is a second mortgage on the Lake Tahoe vacation home, I said, spelling the reality out for her. The waterfront home your grandmother left you. Jason forged your signature on the equity loan documents 3 months ago. He drained the remaining equity in your property to pay off his crypto debts and to keep funding your lavish country club lifestyle. That diamond tennis bracelet you were wearing at my graduation party was bought with your own stolen money. She stared at the forged signatures, her eyes darting frantically across the legal paragraphs. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant, demanding woman who had stormed into my office lobby just 5 minutes ago was completely gone. In her place was a broken, betrayed wife, realizing she was permanently tied to a sinking anchor. Jason needed that commercial building because it was the absolute last asset left to leverage, I told her softly. But I took it off the table. He is completely broke, Simone, and now because of his massive financial fraud. So are you. The silver elevator doors chimed, and 2 large security guards stepped out onto the floor. They approached us cautiously, immediately zeroing in on Simone. "We need you to come with us, Mom," one of the guards said, reaching out to gently guide her toward the exit. Simone did not fight them. She did not scream or hurl any more insults about my personal life. She simply clutched the black folder tightly to her chest, her eyes wide and unseeing, as the guards escorted her into the elevator. She looked completely hollowed out. I watched the metal doors slide shut, sealing her fate. I turned back to the reception desk. The lobby was dead silent. My new colleagues were still standing near the corridors trying to process the intense, brief drama they had just witnessed. I offered the receptionist a polite, professional smile. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, smoothing the front of my charcoal jacket. "It seems my sister-in-law received some highly unfortunate personal news. Could you please let the managing partner know I am ready for our morning meeting?" The receptionist nodded quickly, picking up her phone with a trembling hand. The smear campaign my family had planned was dead on arrival. Simone was no longer an ally to my parents or my brother. She was a ticking time bomb, and Jason was about to take the full force of the explosion. The golden child was finally going to face the brutal reality of the real world, and there was absolutely nothing my parents could do to save him now. The rest of my Monday went exactly as I had planned. I settled into my spacious corner office overlooking the city skyline and dove deep into my corporate finance portfolios. The work was complex and demanding, but it felt incredibly rewarding. Nobody was asking me to draft contracts for free. Nobody was expecting me to sacrifice my own well-being for their benefit. For the first time in my professional life, I was being truly valued for my expertise. By Wednesday, the fallout from my lobby encounter had reached a fever pitch. My phone, which I had unblocked strictly to monitor their inevitable meltdown, was buzzing with a new kind of sheer desperation. According to the frantic voicemails my mother left me, Simone had gone straight home and confronted Jason with the dossier. She had packed her bags, taken whatever expensive jewelry she had left, and moved into a luxury downtown hotel, demanding an immediate divorce. Jason was sleeping on my parents' living room couch, and the bank was threatening to initiate foreclosure proceedings on the building by Friday morning. Then on Thursday morning, the tone of their communications suddenly shifted. The aggressive demands and the blatant guilt trips stopped entirely. Instead, I received a surprisingly calm, polite phone call from my mother, Brenda. "Claire, we know things have gotten completely out of hand," she said, her voice thick with manufactured tears. "We are all under a lot of stress right now. But you are still our daughter, and we want to fix this. Please meet us for dinner tonight at the downtown steakhouse." Just the three of us. No Jason. No screaming. We just want to sit down, talk, and find a way to heal this family. I sat at my solid oak desk listening to her performance. The sudden shift from hostility to diplomacy was highly unnatural. My parents did not know how to apologize, and they certainly did not know how to heal. They only knew how to manipulate. They were terrified, and I knew that when cornered animals are terrified, they set traps. I knew this reconciliation dinner was an ambush, but I also knew I had to end this dynamic completely. I could not have them lingering on the edges of my life, waiting for a moment of weakness. I had to face them one last time and sever the cord permanently. I told her I would be there at 7 o'clock. Then I spent my entire lunch hour preparing for war. I reached into my secure digital files and pulled out the extensive audit records I had built over the years. I gathered every piece of evidence, every hidden bank transaction, and every single lie my father had buried in the family trust. I printed them out and placed them neatly into a fresh folder. I was not walking into a quiet family dinner. I was walking into a courtroom, and I was fully prepared to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. I placed the freshly printed files into my leather briefcase and locked the brass clasps. Before I left my office, I took a moment to look out at the city skyline as the sun began to set. My mind drifted back to the exact contents of the black folder I had handed Simone in the lobby, and the absolute chaos it had unleashed over the past 48 hours. I had not just given her a few bank statements. I had given her a fully documented financial autopsy of her husband's catastrophic failures. When Jason received his initial $500,000 in seed money from my parents and a few gullible family friends, he did not lease an office space. He did not hire a single software developer or sign a vendor contract. Instead, he fell victim to a massive online crypto scam. I had tracked the wire transfers down to the exact second. He dumped the entire $500,000 into an unregulated offshore exchange, betting everything on a heavily promoted digital coin that was rug-pulled just 3 weeks later. The money vanished into the digital ether, leaving him with nothing but a worthless, empty wallet and a bruised ego. But Jason was far too arrogant to admit defeat. To keep up the grand illusion of his booming tech startup and to keep funding Simone's lavish lifestyle, he needed a rapid influx of cash. That was when he crossed the line from incompetence into felony fraud. He hired a shady online notary and forged Simone's signature on a second mortgage application for her prized Lake Tahoe vacation home. He drained $300,000 of equity from the beautiful waterfront property her grandmother had left her. He burned through that stolen money in less than 4 months on luxury car leases, country club dues, and expensive dinners, trying to project the image of a successful entrepreneur. Simone had always turned a blind eye to Jason's deep character flaws as long as the premium credit cards cleared, but seeing her own cherished inheritance stolen behind her back was the ultimate breaking point. The voicemails Jason had left me on Tuesday night were a pathetic symphony of sheer despair. He had called me from our parents' guest bedroom, sobbing uncontrollably into the receiver. "Claire, you ruined my life!" he had wailed, his voice thick with panic and self-pity. Simone took the dogs and checked into a luxury suite downtown. She filed for an emergency legal separation this morning. She showed my investors the folder you gave her. They are threatening to sue me for gross financial negligence. Why did you do this to me? I am your brother. We are supposed to be a team. I had listened to that voicemail while sipping my morning espresso, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, profound sense of justice. He had stolen, defrauded, and lied his way through life while I worked 60-hour weeks to keep a roof over his head. Now the devastating bill had finally come due, and I was not going to pay it. I grabbed my wool coat and headed down to the parking garage. The drive to the downtown steakhouse took exactly 20 minutes. The restaurant was an old-school establishment with dark mahogany paneling, dim amber lighting, and deep leather booths. It was exactly the kind of place my father chose when he wanted to project unyielding power and intimidate whoever sat across from him. I handed my car keys to the valet, stepped through the heavy glass doors, and let my eyes adjust to the dim light. The hostess led me toward a private secluded alcove in the very back of the dining room. As I approached the table, I immediately realized my instincts had been perfectly accurate. It was not a quiet family dinner aimed at healing our wounds. My father, Richard, sat rigid in his tailored suit, his face pale and tense. My mother, Brenda, sat next to him, clutching a linen napkin nervously in her lap, her eyes darting around the room. But they were not alone. Sitting across from them, nursing a glass of expensive scotch, was a man I recognized instantly, Gordon Mitchell. He was a sleazy estate lawyer who had been doing under-the-table legal work for my father for over a decade. Gordon was the kind of attorney who specialized in burying financial mistakes threatening creditors and making problems quietly disappear. I stopped at the edge of the table, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "Good evening," I said, my voice smooth and entirely unbothered. "I see we have a guest. I thought you explicitly said this was going to be a private family dinner, Brenda." My mother refused to meet my eyes. She stared down at her sparkling water glass, her hands trembling slightly against the tablecloth. My father cleared his throat aggressively, adjusting his silk tie. "Sit down, Claire," he commanded, motioning to the empty chair directly across from him. "Gordon is here to help us resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding before it goes any further and damages the family name." I pulled out the heavy leather chair and sat down, placing my briefcase carefully on the floor next to my feet. I did not order a drink. I simply folded my hands on the pristine white tablecloth and waited for them to make their move. Gordon smiled, a greasy, practiced expression that did not reach his cold eyes. "Hello, Claire. It is very good to see you," he said smoothly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Your parents are extremely distressed. The situation with Jason and the commercial building has escalated unnecessarily. We are hoping we can come to a quiet, amicable agreement tonight that benefits everyone and keeps the family legacy intact." "There is no legacy, Gordon," I replied cleanly, slicing through his corporate pleasantries. "There is a massive mountain of debt and a deed with my brother's name printed on it. If he cannot secure the financing, the bank will foreclose by Friday. That is a matter for Jason and his lenders. It has absolutely nothing to do with me." My father slammed his hand flat against the table, causing the expensive silverware to rattle sharply. "It has everything to do with you," he hissed, leaning forward so the neighboring tables would not hear him. "You deliberately sabotaged his marriage. You handed Simone those fabricated financial records just to hurt him. Because of your little stunt, his investors pulled out, and his wife is demanding half of whatever assets he has left. You are trying to destroy him." "They were not fabricated," Richard Wasse corrected him, my tone dropping to an icy, terrifying chill. "And I did not sabotage his marriage. Jason sabotaged his own marriage when he forged Simone's signature and stole the equity out of her Lake Tahoe property to play pretend on the crypto market. I simply provided her with the receipts of his federal crimes." "He is a visionary," my mother suddenly blurted out, hot tears welling in her eyes. "Visionaries take calculated risks. You would not understand that because you have no imagination, Claire. You just sit in your office and look at boring spreadsheets all day. Jason was trying to build something massive for all of us, and you destroyed his dream out of pure spite." I stared at her, letting the sheer towering delusion of her statement hang in the heavy air. They were still fiercely defending him. Even after knowing he had committed felony fraud and squandered nearly $1 million, they were still desperately clinging to the fantasy that he was the golden child who could do no wrong. They were willing to sacrifice my sanity and my future just to maintain his fragile ego. "We are not here to debate Jason's specific investment strategies," Gordon interrupted, his voice taking on a sharper, more threatening edge. He reached into his battered leather satchel and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slid them slowly across the polished wood table until they rested directly in front of me. "We are here to talk about your financial responsibilities, Claire, and what exactly happens if you refuse to fulfill them." I looked down at the documents, but I did not reach out to touch them. I knew exactly what this was. This was the trap my father had orchestrated. They thought they had finally cornered me. They thought the presence of a lawyer and the threat of legal action would break my resolve and force me back into submission. But they had absolutely no idea that I had already audited their entire existence, and the cage they thought they were putting me in was actually about to close permanently around them. Gordon tapped his manicured finger against the thick stack of papers. These documents outline a very troubling pattern of financial mismanagement, Claire. He began, his tone dripping with fake concern. According to your father's records, large sums of money were quietly diverted from the primary family trust over the past 5 years. The exact years you were paying for your expensive law school tuition and your high-end downtown apartment. It paints a very clear picture of embezzlement. I raised an eyebrow, feigning mild curiosity. Embezzlement, I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue. That is a very heavy accusation, Gordon, especially since my father was the sole executor of that trust and authorized every single transfer. Not according to these affidavits, my father interjected, his chest puffing out slightly. I have signed sworn statements saying you manipulated the digital ledgers. You abused your position as the family financial proxy to steal from us. Gordon has prepared a formal complaint to submit to the State Bar Association. My mother leaned forward, her eyes wide and pleading. We do not want to do this, Claire, she whispered loudly. We love you. We do not want to see your career ruined on your very first week at the new firm. If the Bar Association gets these documents, you will be disbarred before you even try your first case. You could face criminal charges. Just sign the reinstatement forms for Jason's commercial building tonight. If you do that, Gordon will destroy these files and we can all go back to being a family. The sheer audacity of their plan was almost impressive. They had actually sat down with a corrupt lawyer and fabricated a federal crime to blackmail their own daughter. They were treating my law license, the thing I had sacrificed 5 years of my life to achieve, as a hostage. They expected me to panic. They expected me to start crying and begging for mercy, just like I used to do when I was a teenager trying to avoid their wrath. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and laughed. It was not a nervous chuckle. It was a genuine, chilling laugh that echoed slightly in the quiet alcove of the restaurant. My parents exchanged a look of pure confusion. Gordon stiffened, his professional facade cracking just a fraction. What is so funny? Richard demanded, his face flushing with anger. I assure you the Bar Association will not find this amusing. I stopped laughing and looked at the three of them. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my phone. I placed it face up on the white tablecloth right next to my water glass. The screen was illuminated, showing a bright red recording timer that had been running since the moment I sat down. Did you know that our state operates under a one-party consent law for recording private conversations? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly pleasant. That means as long as one person in the conversation is aware of the recording, it is entirely legal and admissible in court. I am that one person, and I just captured all three of you conspiring to extort a licensed officer of the court. My mother's face went completely pale. She stared at the red recording timer as if it were a venomous snake. Gordon shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between my phone and my face. You cannot use that, Gordon blustered, attempting to recover his authority. That is a breach of ethics. I am not finished, Gordon, I said, cutting him off sharply. I reached down and picked up my own leather briefcase. I placed it squarely on the table, pushing their fabricated extortion documents aside. I opened the brass clasps and pulled out the fresh folder I had printed earlier that afternoon. I slid it across the table, stopping it directly in front of the sleazy lawyer. You see, Gordon, my father is not the only one who kept records, I explained. Since I was the one managing the books to keep this family from drowning, I conducted a full forensic audit of the trust. I wanted to make sure everything was perfectly legal before I started my new job. And what I found was absolutely fascinating. Gordon hesitantly opened the folder. His eyes immediately widened as he scanned the first page. I did not embezzle anything to pay for law school, I stated, looking directly at my father. I worked full-time as a paralegal and took out student loans in my own name, but someone was definitely draining the family trust. I tracked over $900,000 funneling out of the primary accounts over the last 7 years. It was heavily disguised as consulting fees and property maintenance costs. But those vendors do not actually exist, do they, Richard? They are shell LLCs registered in Delaware. My father opened his mouth, but his voice completely failed him. He looked like all the air had been violently sucked out of his lungs. You funneled untaxed money out of the trust to fund Jason's failed business ventures and to pay for Brenda's luxury shopping habits, I continued relentlessly. It is textbook tax evasion and wire fraud. And Gordon, since your signature is on the annual trust tax returns, you are legally implicated as a co-conspirator. Gordon dropped the papers as if they were physically burning his hands. He looked at my father with a mix of absolute terror and raging fury. You told me the ledgers were clean, Richard, he hissed, his voice trembling. You told me she was just a disgruntled daughter trying to cause trouble. You did not tell me she had a forensic audit of the Delaware accounts. Because he is arrogant, Gordon, I answered for him. He thought I was just a stupid little girl he could bully. But I am a corporate finance attorney. I hunt down hidden money for a living. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. The power dynamic in the alcove had completely inverted. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the executioner. So here is what is going to happen, I said, dictating the terms with absolute authority. Gordon, you are going to take your fake extortion documents, and you are going to put them through a shredder tonight. Then you are going to formally drop my parents as clients, because if I ever see your name on another piece of paper directed at me, I will hand this audio recording and this tax audit directly to the FBI and the Bar Association. You will lose your license, and you will go to federal prison. Gordon did not hesitate. He was a survivor, and he knew when a ship was sinking. He frantically shoved his papers back into his battered leather satchel. He stood up, nearly knocking over his glass of scotch in the process. I am officially withdrawing my representation, he stammered, looking at my father. Do not ever contact my office again, Richard. He turned and practically sprinted out of the restaurant, leaving my parents sitting in stunned, terrified silence. The grand intimidation tactic had completely imploded in less than 10 minutes. I looked at my mother and father. They were staring at me with a level of fear I had never seen before. The grand illusion of their power was dead. They finally understood that they had created a monster in their own image. Only I was smarter, more ruthless, and entirely unbound by their emotional manipulation. You are a monster, my mother whispered, tears spilling over her eyelashes. How could you do this to your own flesh and blood? I learned from the best. Brenda, I replied calmly, packing my folder back into my briefcase. You tried to blackmail me and ruin my career tonight just to save Jason from his own incompetence. You do not get to play the victim anymore. I stood up from the table and smoothed the front of my jacket. The bank is going to foreclose on the commercial building tomorrow morning, Richard, I said, looking down at my father. There is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. Jason is going to lose everything, and Simone is going to take whatever is left in the divorce. You gambled your entire legacy on the golden child, and you lost. I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and dropped it into my pocket. Have a wonderful dinner, I said. I hear the steak here is fantastic, but you might want to check your credit limits before you order. I turned my back on them and walked out of the dim restaurant. The cool night air hit my face and I took a deep, cleansing breath. The heavy chains of my toxic family were completely shattered. They would never try to threaten me again. They knew I held the keys to their destruction, and they would spend the rest of their lives living in absolute fear of the daughter they had thrown away. The upcoming Friday morning at the bank was going to be the final nail in their coffin. Friday morning arrived with a heavy gray overcast that perfectly matched the impending financial doom hanging over my family. I did not go to my law firm that morning. Instead, I arrived at the downtown executive branch of First Continental Bank at exactly 8:30. I did not walk through the main public entrance where the tellers processed daily deposits. I was escorted through the secure underground garage, and taken up the private elevator reserved specifically for high-net-worth clients and corporate partners. The bank manager, a stern, pragmatic man named Mr. Harrison, led me into a plush, glass-walled conference room adjacent to the main executive waiting area. I took a seat in a heavy leather chair, smoothed the skirt of my tailored designer suit, and accepted a cup of black coffee from an assistant. Through the frosted horizontal stripes of the glass walls, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the reception desk and the waiting area. I was completely hidden from the outside, but I could see and hear everything unfolding in the lobby. I sipped my hot coffee and watched the silver elevator doors waiting for the show to begin. At exactly 8:55, the doors pinged loudly and slid open. My family stumbled out onto the polished marble floor. I actually leaned forward in my chair, taking in the absolute sheer devastation of their physical appearances. They looked like ghosts of the arrogant, untouchable socialites they had pretended to be just 1 week ago. My father, Richard, was wearing a suit, but it looked like he had slept in it. His usually crisp collar was rumpled, his tie was completely missing, and his face was flushed with a frantic, sweaty panic. My mother, Brenda, was not wearing her signature string of expensive pearls. Her hair, which was usually styled perfectly, was flat and pulled back into a messy clip. She was clutching her designer handbag against her chest, like a protective shield, looking around the intimidating corporate environment with wide, terrified eyes. But Jason was by far the worst. The golden child, the supposed visionary of the family, looked physically ill. There were deep, dark circles under his eyes, and his hands were trembling so violently that the messy stack of financial documents he was holding kept fluttering against his chest. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. They rushed the reception desk in a chaotic, disorganized cluster. Richard slammed his hand flat against the granite counter, startling the young receptionist. "We need to see Mr. Harrison immediately," he demanded, his voice loud and cracking with desperation. "It is regarding the commercial loan on the downtown property. Tell him Richard is here and it is a financial emergency." The receptionist maintained her perfectly polished professional demeanor. She typed a few keys on her computer and looked up. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" she asked coldly. "Mr. Harrison has a completely full schedule this morning, handling the foreclosure docket." "I do not need an appointment," Richard snapped, leaning over the desk, attempting to use his physical presence to intimidate her. "I have been a premium client at this bank for over 2 decades. My accounts run through this specific branch. You are going to pick up that phone and tell him I am standing right here, or I will have your job. Sir, if you raise your voice at me again, I will call the lobby security and have you remove the receptionist," replied, her tone turning to absolute ice. "Your premium accounts were frozen at midnight due to a hard default on your collateral. You no longer have priority status at this institution. Please take a seat in the waiting area and Mr. Harrison will be out when he has a moment." Richard recoiled as if he had been physically slapped. The realization that his social status and his wealthy facade meant absolutely nothing inside these walls hit him incredibly hard. He opened his mouth to argue, but Jason grabbed his arm and practically dragged him away from the desk. "Dad, stop it," Jason hissed, his voice trembling. "You are going to get us thrown out. If we get thrown out, the building is gone. Simone already served me with divorce papers yesterday. She froze our joint checking account. I literally have nothing left but this deed." They collapsed into the leather chairs in the waiting area, turning on each other like starved animals in a cage. I sat silently in the conference room, listening to the beautiful sound of their toxic alliance shattering. "You told me this was a free and clear asset," Jason accused, pointing a shaking finger at his father's chest. "You handed me that envelope in front of hundreds of people and told me to build an empire. You knew it was a trap. You knew it had $3.5 million of hidden debt attached to it." "I was trying to protect the family legacy," Richard fired back, though his voice lacked its usual booming authority. "I assumed your sister would just fall in line and keep underwriting the debt like she always does. How was I supposed to know she would pull a stunt like this and try to destroy us?" "She did not destroy us," Brenda sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "We are ruined, Richard. Gordon called me last night from a private number. He said he shredded all the documents, and he is closing his legal practice to move out of state. He said Claire has proof of the tax evasion. He told us we are on our own. If the bank seizes the building today, we have nowhere to live. They are going to take the house next. Jason dropped his head into his hands, hyperventilating into his palms. I am going to be homeless, he moaned. I am 32 years old, and I am going to be completely bankrupt. You ruined my life. Both of you ruined my life. Before Richard could scream back, the heavy mahogany door of the executive suite opened. Mr. Harrison stepped out into the waiting area, holding a single manila folder. He looked completely unsympathetic, a true veteran of corporate banking who had seen hundreds of arrogant men lose their fortunes. My family scrambled to their feet instantly. Richard plastered on a fake, desperate smile, stepping forward with his hand outstretched. Harrison, thank God, he said, his voice dripping with forced camaraderie. Listen, there has been a massive misunderstanding with our guarantor. My daughter made a clerical error with her portal authorization, but we are sorting it out. We just need a temporary bridge loan, a 30-day extension to get the paperwork finalized. Mr. Harrison did not shake his hand. He stood perfectly still, looking at the three of them with clinical detachment. There is no misunderstanding, Richard, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet lobby. Your daughter formally withdrew her financial backing. The grace period expired at exactly midnight. Your commercial loan is officially in default. But I hold the deed. Jason interrupted, shoving his papers toward the bank manager. I am the legal owner of the property. The building itself is worth at least $4 million on the open market. You have the collateral right there. Just issue the extension in my name. Mr. Harrison looked at Jason with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. You have zero verifiable income, Jason, he stated bluntly. You have a terrible credit history, a mountain of unsecured crypto debt, and you are currently named in a civil suit regarding a fraudulent second mortgage. This bank does not issue multi-million-dollar bridge loans to individuals with your financial profile. Jason went completely pale, staggering back a step, as if the air had been punched out of him. Then what happens? He whispered. You cannot just take it. We are not taking it, mister. Harrison replied calmly, opening the folder. In fact, First Continental Bank is no longer holding your debt at all. Richard frowned, confusion replacing his panic for a brief second. What do you mean you are not holding the debt? Who is holding it? When a high-value commercial loan goes into hard default without a guarantor, we immediately offload the risk, Mr. Harrison explained. We sold your distressed asset portfolio late last night to a private equity firm that specializes in aggressive commercial acquisitions. They purchased the $3.5 million debt for pennies on the dollar, and they are now the legal lien holders of your property. They sold it? Brenda gasped, gripping Richard's arm. Who bought it? Who do we need to talk to? We can negotiate with a private firm. We can offer them a percentage of Jason's company. Mr. Harrison closed the folder and looked toward the frosted glass of the conference room where I was sitting. The firm requested an immediate repossession of the asset, he said, ignoring Brenda's ridiculous offer. The lead counsel for the private equity firm is waiting in the conference room right now to finalize the foreclosure and serve you with the eviction notices. Jason swallowed hard, running a trembling hand through his hair. He desperately wiped the sweat from his forehead, trying to look presentable. Okay, he stammered, straightening his jacket. Okay, I can talk to them. I can pitch them my vision. Just introduce me to the lawyer. I set my empty coffee cup down on the glass table. I picked up my leather briefcase and walked toward the conference room doors. It was time to give the golden child exactly what he asked for. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the conference room. The hinges were completely silent, but the metallic click of the latch echoed sharply through the quiet executive waiting area. Jason, Richard, and Brenda all turned their heads simultaneously. They were expecting to see a ruthless corporate shark step out to negotiate the terms of their ruin. Instead, they saw me. I was wearing my dark charcoal suit, my leather briefcase gripped loosely in my right hand, and an expression of absolute calm on my face. Mr. Harrison stood perfectly still, his hands folded professionally in front of him. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice completely devoid of emotion, "I would like to introduce you to the senior corporate counsel representing the private equity firm that purchased your commercial debt last night." The silence that fell over the waiting area was suffocating. It was so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents above us. Jason's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at me, then looked at Mr. Harrison, and then back at me. His exhausted brain was struggling to process the information. "Claire," he finally croaked, stepping forward hesitantly. "What are you doing here? Do you work for them? Did you buy the debt to save us?" It was almost poetic how deeply ingrained their entitlement was. Even standing on the absolute edge of total financial ruin, his first instinct was to assume I was still operating as his personal safety net. He actually believed I had maneuvered this massive corporate acquisition just to hand the prize right back to him. My father, however, was a slightly sharper man. He had been on the receiving end of my wrath at the restaurant 2 nights prior. He knew I was not there to save them. The color drained from Richard's face completely, leaving him looking gray and sickly. "You," he whispered, taking a slow step backward until he bumped into the edge of a leather chair. "You planned this. You set us up." "I did not set you up, Richard," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the marble lobby. "I simply stopped paying for your mistakes." When I withdrew my financial guarantee, the bank naturally flagged the account as a high-risk default. My firm specializes in acquiring distressed commercial assets. I simply brought the property to the attention of our managing partners. They reviewed the location, the market value, and the sheer incompetence of the current deed holder, and they agreed it was a highly lucrative acquisition. We bought the debt for pennies on the dollar late last night. Jason stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "But I hold the deed," he argued, his voice rising in panic. "It is my building. You cannot just take it away from me. I am your brother. We can work this out. I will give you a 50% stake in my new tech company. I will make you a senior partner. Just sign the bridge loan extension, Claire. Please." I looked at him, feeling a wave of absolute disgust. "I do not want a stake in a fake tech company, Jason," I said coldly. "You do not have an empire. You have a mountain of crypto debt and a pending divorce. You forged Simone's signature to steal her inheritance, and you blew it all trying to play pretend. You have absolutely nothing left to offer me or my firm." My mother let out a loud, dramatic wail. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing into her palms. "You are a monster!" she cried out, her voice shrill and echoing. "You stole your own brother's inheritance. You stole the family legacy. How can you sleep at night knowing you ruined your own flesh and blood?" "I sleep incredibly well, Brenda," I countered, not breaking eye contact. "Because it was never his inheritance. It was never his building. It belonged to the bank because you and Richard mortgaged it to the absolute limit to fund your luxury lifestyle. I am the only reason you did not lose it 5 years ago. You promised it to me, and then you paraded Jason in front of hundreds of people and handed him my reward. So I simply let the natural consequences of your actions finally reach you." I unclasped my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of official legal documents printed on heavy bonded paper. I stepped forward and handed the stack directly to Jason. He took them automatically, his hands shaking so violently the papers rustled loudly. "Those are the official foreclosure and eviction notices," I explained, my tone shifting back into a strictly professional register. "As the legal representative of the new lien holder, I am formally denying your request for a loan extension. The property is officially seized. You have until Monday morning at 9 o'clock to remove any personal belongings from the premises. If you or Richard attempt to access the building after that time, you will be arrested for trespassing on private corporate property." Jason looked down at the documents. The bold black letters reading "Notice of Foreclosure" seemed to burn his eyes. He dropped the papers onto the floor as if they were physically hot. He fell to his knees right there in the middle of the executive bank lobby, completely breaking down. He sobbed loudly, clutching his chest, a grown man finally facing the brutal reality of the real world without his parents' money to shield him. Richard lunged forward, his fists clenched at his sides. He looked like he wanted to physically attack me, but Mr. Harrison immediately stepped between us, raising a stern hand. "Sir, if you take one more step toward my client, I will have the armed guards drag you out of this building in handcuffs." The bank manager warned, his voice sharp as a razor. Richard stopped, his chest heaving. He glared at me with a mixture of pure hatred and absolute defeat. "You are no longer my daughter," he spat the words out like venom. "You are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are completely dead to this family." The threat that used to terrify me when I was a child now sounded like sweet music. "That is the best news I have heard all week, Richard." I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. Because this family has been dead weight around my neck for 35 years. I turned to Mr. Harrison, extending my hand. He shook it firmly, a silent acknowledgement of a clean, highly profitable corporate transaction. "Thank you for your time this morning, Mr. Harrison," I said politely. "My firm will wire the final processing fees by the end of the business day." "It was a pleasure doing business with you," the manager replied, offering a small, respectful nod. I did not look back at my family. I did not need to see Jason's pathetic tears or Brenda's theatrical sobbing or Richard's hollow rage. I turned on my heel and walked toward the private elevator. I pressed the silver button and watched the doors slide open. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the underground parking garage, and watched my toxic family disappear as the doors slid shut. The heavy atmosphere of the bank vanished instantly. I walked to my car feeling lighter than I ever had in my entire life. I had completely dismantled their illusion. I had legally stripped the golden child of his unearned prize, and I had secured a massive financial victory for my new law firm in my very first week. The following months were a masterclass in watching karma work efficiently. The commercial building was successfully liquidated by my firm generating a massive profit and securing my position as a rising star within the partnership. I bought a luxury penthouse apartment overlooking the harbor using my own bonus money. The fallout for my family was absolute and unforgiving. Simone finalized her divorce, taking whatever assets Jason had left to satisfy the fraudulent debt he had strapped her with. Jason was forced to move back into my parents' house completely broke and unemployable. But even that safety net did not last long. Without my pristine credit to shield them, Richard's house of cards finally collapsed. The bank seized the family home a few months later. My parents were forced to downsize to a tiny rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, their country club memberships revoked, and their socialite status completely destroyed. Occasionally, my phone will block a restricted number. Sometimes I receive long, rambling emails from burner accounts begging for forgiveness, asking for a small loan just to get them back on their feet. I never read them. I simply hit delete and go about my day. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, but occasionally you have to hand them the eviction notice yourself. I had to become the villain in their story to finally become the hero in my own. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own future and your sanity? Tell me your story in the comments below. And remember, never set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe that true family is built on respect, not financial extortion. Thank you for listening to my journey. Friday morning broke with a heavy, torrential downpour that seemed perfectly orchestrated for the occasion. The sky over the city was a bruised slate gray, and the relentless rain washed the streets clean. I stood in front of my closet and selected my armor for the final battle. I chose a sharply tailored midnight blue suit, a crisp white silk blouse, and a pair of classic black leather pumps. My hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless twist. I looked exactly like the senior corporate finance attorney I was. There was no trace of the terrified people-pleasing daughter who used to write checks to cover her father's bounced country club dues. I left my apartment and drove to the downtown executive branch of First Continental Bank, I did not park in this public lot, and I did not walk through the main retail entrance where the everyday tellers worked. I had clearance for the secure underground garage. I parked my car, took the private elevator directly to the 12th floor, and stepped into the hushed, hyper-expensive world of commercial lending. The floors were covered in thick acoustic carpets, the walls were paneled in rich walnut, and the air smelled faintly of expensive leather and citrus room spray. Mr. Harrison, the senior commercial branch manager, had been briefed on the situation by my firm's partners the night before. He guided me into a private glass-walled conference room situated just off the main executive waiting area. The glass was heavily frosted on the bottom half but perfectly clear at eye level, allowing me to see out into the lobby without being easily noticed from the outside. I poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee from the silver carafe on the credenza, sat down in a heavy leather chair and waited. My family was scheduled to meet with the loan officers at 9 o'clock. At exactly 8:45, the silver elevator doors chimed loudly. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished mahogany table as my family stumbled out into the lobby. The visual transformation was absolutely staggering. For my entire life, Richard and Brenda had cultivated an image of flawless aristocratic wealth. They never left the house without looking like they were stepping onto a yacht or walking into a charity gala. But the people who walked off that elevator looked like they had just survived a shipwreck. My father was wearing a gray suit, but the fabric was deeply wrinkled as if he had slept in it. He was not wearing a tie, and the top button of his shirt was undone, revealing the frantic flush of his neck. His posture, which was usually rigid and domineering, was hunched. My mother looked even worse. Brenda was completely devoid of her signature string of pearls and her heavy diamond rings. Her face was pale and she had clearly foregone her extensive morning makeup routine. She was clutching a worn leather handbag against her chest like a protective shield, her eyes darting nervously around the intimidating corporate environment. But Jason was the true picture of absolute despair. The golden child was sweating profusely, his hair was a greasy, disheveled mess, and he was clutching a thick manila folder of useless business proposals so tightly against his chest that the cardboard was bending. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. They moved as a frantic, disorganized pack toward the main reception desk. Richard slammed his hand flat against the granite counter, startling the young professional receptionist. "We need to see Mr. Harrison immediately," Richard demanded, his voice loud and cracking with unfiltered panic. "It is regarding the commercial loan on the downtown property. Tell him Richard is here and it is a financial emergency. We need to secure our bridge loan before the 10 o'clock clearing window." The receptionist maintained her perfectly polished demeanor, completely unfazed by his aggression. She typed a few keys on her keyboard and looked up at him with polite indifference. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" she asked coldly. "Mr. Harrison has a completely full schedule this morning, handling the commercial foreclosure docket." "I do not need an appointment," Richard snapped, leaning over the desk, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate her. "I have been a premium wealth management client at this institution for over 2 decades. My primary estate accounts run through this specific branch. You are going to pick up that phone and tell him I am standing right here, or I will personally see to it that you are fired. Sir, if you raise your voice at me again, I will call the lobby security and have you escorted out of the building," the receptionist replied, her tone dropping in temperature. "Furthermore, your premium wealth status was officially revoked on Wednesday. Your accounts were frozen due to a hard default on your primary commercial collateral. You no longer have priority status at this bank. Please take a seat in the waiting area, and a loan officer will be out when they are available." Richard recoiled, physically staggering back a step. The realization that his social status and his wealthy facade meant absolutely nothing inside these walls hit him incredibly hard. He opened his mouth to argue, but Jason grabbed his arm and practically dragged him away from the desk. "Dad, stop it!" Jason hissed, his voice trembling so badly I could hear it through the glass. "You are going to get us thrown out. If we get thrown out by security, the building is gone." Simone finalized the separation paperwork yesterday. She froze our joint checking account and took the cars. I literally have nothing left but this deed. They collapsed into the leather chairs in the waiting area, turning on each other like starved animals. I sat silently in my conference room, drinking my coffee and listening to the beautiful sound of their toxic alliance shattering. You told me this was a free and clear asset, Jason accused, pointing a shaking finger at his father's chest. You handed me that envelope at the graduation party in front of hundreds of people and told me to build an empire. You knew it was a trap. You knew it had $3.5 million of hidden debt attached to it. I was trying to protect the family legacy, Richard fired back, though his voice lacked its usual booming authority. I assumed your sister would just fall in line and keep underwriting the debt like she always does. She is the one who caused this crisis. How was I supposed to know she would pull a malicious stunt like this and try to destroy her own family? She did not destroy us, Brenda sobbed, burying her face in her hands. We are ruined, Richard. Gordon called me last night from a burner phone. He said he shredded all of our legal documents and he is closing his practice to move out of state. He said Claire has a forensic audit of the tax evasion. He told us we are completely on our own. If the bank seizes the building today, we have nowhere to live. They are going to take the house next. Jason dropped his head between his knees, hyperventilating loudly. I am going to be homeless, he moaned, dragging his hands through his greasy hair. I am 32 years old, and I am going to be completely bankrupt. You ruined my life. Both of you ruined my life. You lied to me about everything. Before Richard could scream back, the heavy mahogany door of the executive suite opened. Mr. Harrison stepped out into the waiting area holding a single thin file. He looked completely unsympathetic, a true veteran of corporate banking who had seen hundreds of arrogant men lose their fortunes due to their own greed. My family scrambled to their feet, instantly swarming him like desperate beggars. Richard plastered on a fake, frantic smile, stepping forward with his hand outstretched. Harrison. Thank God you are here, Richard said, his voice dripping with forced camaraderie and sheer desperation. Listen, there has been a massive administrative misunderstanding with our guarantor. My daughter made a clerical error with her portal authorization, but we are sorting it out internally. We just need a temporary bridge loan, a simple 30-day extension to get the paperwork finalized and keep the asset secure. Mr. Harrison did not shake his hand. He stood perfectly still, looking at the three of them with clinical detachment. There is no misunderstanding, Richard, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet lobby. Your daughter formally withdrew her financial backing. The grace period expired at exactly midnight last night. Your commercial loan is officially in hard default. But I hold the deed, Jason interrupted, shoving his messy stack of business proposals toward the bank manager. I am the legal owner of the property. The building itself was appraised at over $4 million on the open market. You have the collateral right there. I just need a small capital injection. Just issue the extension in my name, and I will secure the financing through my startup investors. Mr. Harrison looked at Jason with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disdain. You have zero verifiable income, Jason, he stated bluntly. You have a terrible credit history, a massive mountain of unsecured offshore crypto debt, and you are currently named in a civil suit regarding a fraudulent second mortgage on a residential property. This bank does not issue multi-million-dollar commercial bridge loans to individuals with your catastrophic financial profile. We are not granting an extension. Jason stood perfectly still, the rejection hanging heavy in the air between them. He looked at the bank manager as if Mr. Harrison had just spoken a foreign language. Then what happens? He whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. If you will not give me the bridge loan, then what do I do? You cannot just take the building away. We are not taking it, Mr. Harrison replied calmly, opening the thin file he had brought out from his office. In fact, First Continental Bank is no longer holding your commercial debt at all. Richard frowned, his panic briefly replaced by intense confusion. What do you mean you are not holding the debt? He demanded, stepping forward. Who is holding it? I demand to know who has the paper on my family property. When a high-value commercial loan goes into hard default without a qualified guarantor, we immediately offload the risk, Mr. Harrison explained, his tone clinical and detached. We sold your distressed asset portfolio late last night to a private equity firm. They specialize in aggressive commercial acquisitions. They purchased the $3.5 million debt for pennies on the dollar, and they are now the legal lien holders of the property. They sold it! Brenda gasped, gripping Richard's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. Who bought it, Richard? Who do we need to talk to? We can negotiate with a private firm. We can offer them a percentage of Jason's company. We can make a deal. Mr. Harrison closed the folder and looked directly toward the frosted glass of the conference room where I was sitting. The firm requested an immediate repossession of the asset, he said, completely ignoring Brenda's ridiculous offer. The lead counsel for the private equity firm is waiting in the conference room right now to finalize the foreclosure and serve you with the eviction notices. Jason swallowed hard, running a trembling hand through his ruined hair. He desperately wiped the sweat from his forehead, trying to pull himself together. He adjusted his wrinkled jacket, trying to summon the fake bravado he had relied on his entire life. Okay, he stammered, taking a deep breath. Okay, I can talk to them. I can pitch them my vision. Just introduce me to the lawyer. I set my coffee cup down on the glass table. The ceramic clinked softly in the quiet room. I picked up my leather briefcase and walked toward the heavy glass doors. I pushed them open. The hinges were completely silent, but the metallic click of the latch echoed sharply through the quiet executive waiting area. Jason, Richard, and Brenda all turned their heads simultaneously. They were expecting to see a ruthless corporate shark step out to negotiate the terms of their ruin. Instead, they saw me. I stood in the doorway wearing my midnight blue designer suit, my posture perfectly straight, and my expression completely unreadable. Mr. Harrison stood perfectly still, his hands folded professionally in front of him. Gentlemen, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, I would like to introduce you to the senior corporate counsel representing the private equity firm that purchased your commercial debt last night. The silence that fell over the waiting area was suffocating. It was so absolute, I could hear the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the bank lobby. Jason's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His exhausted brain was violently struggling to process the information. Claire, he finally croaked, taking a hesitant step toward me. What are you doing here? Doing? Do you work for them? Did you buy the debt to save us? It was almost poetic how deeply ingrained his entitlement was. Even standing on the absolute edge of total financial ruin, his first instinct was to assume I was still operating as his personal safety net. He actually believed I had maneuvered this massive corporate acquisition just to hand the multi-million-dollar prize right back to him. My father, however, was a slightly sharper man. He had seen the ruthless calculation in my eyes at the restaurant. He knew I was not there to save them. The remaining color drained from Richard's face, leaving him looking hollow and sickly. You, he whispered, taking a slow step backward until he bumped into the edge of a leather chair. You planned this. You set us up. I did not set you up, Richard, I replied, my voice carrying clearly through the marble lobby. I simply stopped paying for your mistakes. When I withdrew my financial guarantee, the bank naturally flagged the account as a high-risk default. My firm specializes in acquiring distressed commercial assets. I simply brought the property to the attention of our managing partners. They reviewed the location, the market value, and the sheer incompetence of the current deed holder, and they agreed it was a highly lucrative acquisition. Jason stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. But I hold the deed, he argued, his voice rising in sheer panic. It is my building. You cannot just take it away from me. I am your sister. We can work this out. I will give you a 50% stake in my new tech company. Just sign the bridge loan extension, Claire. Please. Let us take this into the conference room, I said, ignoring his desperate plea. I turned and walked back into the glass-walled room. Mr. Harrison gestured for them to follow. They walked in slowly, looking like prisoners entering a tribunal. I did not sit on the side of the table. I walked directly to the head of the heavy mahogany boardroom table and took my seat. I placed my leather briefcase in front of me and unclasped the brass locks. My family sat across from me. They looked incredibly small. I pulled out a thick stack of official legal documents printed on heavy bonded paper. I placed my hands flat on the table and looked directly at my father. "You said Jason was the future of the family legacy, Dad." I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of warmth. "But you forgot one thing. I am the one who built the safety net. And today, my firm is repossessing it." I slid the heavy stack of papers across the polished wood. They came to a stop, right in front of Jason. The bold black letters reading, "Notice of Foreclosure and Seizure of Asset," stared up at him. "As the legal representative of the new lien holder, I am officially denying your request for a loan extension." I stated, my tone shifting into a strictly professional register. "The property is legally seized as of this exact moment. You have until Monday morning at 9 o'clock to remove any personal belongings from the premises. If you or Richard attempt to access the building after that time, you will be arrested for trespassing on private corporate property." Jason looked down at the documents. He did not even try to read the legal jargon. He knew exactly what it meant. He had lost. He dropped his head onto the table, burying his face in his arms. He began to sob loudly right there in the executive conference room. He was a grown man finally facing the brutal reality of the real world without his parents' money to shield him. He was legally stripped of everything in a matter of seconds. Richard lunged forward, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He looked like he wanted to physically flip the heavy table over, but Mr. Harrison immediately stepped forward, raising a stern hand. "Sir, if you make a single aggressive move toward my client, I will have the armed guards drag you out of this building in handcuffs," the bank manager warned, his voice sharp as a razor. Richard stopped, his chest heaving violently. He glared at me with a mixture of pure hatred and absolute defeat. "You are no longer my daughter," he spat the words out like venom. "You are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are completely dead to this family." The threat that used to terrify me when I was a child now sounded like sweet, beautiful music. "That is the best news I have heard all week, Richard." I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile, because this family has been dead weight around my neck for 35 years. I stood up from the head of the table. I closed my empty briefcase and fastened the locks. The transaction was complete. The golden child was bankrupt, and the architects of my lifelong misery were finally buried under the rubble of their own arrogance. I walked out of the conference room, leaving them to drown in their tears, and stepped into the private elevator. I had an empire of my own to build, and absolutely nothing holding me back. The following Monday morning arrived with a crisp, clear sky. I did not drive to the commercial building to witness the eviction in person. I did not need to. I sat at my solid oak desk in my new corner office, sipping a hot espresso and reviewing a corporate merger file. At exactly 9:15, my computer chimed with a secure email notification from my firm's asset management team. The message was brief and clinical. The locks on the downtown property had been successfully changed. Corporate security had escorted the previous occupant off the premises. Jason had tried to stall, begging for an extra hour to gather his things, but he was ultimately led out the front glass doors carrying a single cardboard box. The multi-million-dollar empire my parents had illegally gifted him lasted exactly 3 days. Simone did not waste a single second. The moment Jason returned to my parents' house carrying his pathetic cardboard box, he was formally served with divorce papers. Simone had spent the weekend hiring the most ruthless and expensive family law attorney in the city. The black financial dossier I had handed her in the firm lobby became the absolute centerpiece of her legal strategy, because Jason had committed federal fraud by forging her signature on the Lake Tahoe mortgage. The judge granted Simone an emergency asset freeze. She went after him with a level of vengeance that I had to silently admire. She systematically drained whatever legitimate joint funds remained to recoup the equity he had stolen from her inheritance. She took the 2 luxury cars, the expensive designer furniture, and even the purebred dogs. Jason was legally ordered to assume the entirety of his offshore crypto debt. The divorce proceedings were swift and merciless. He walked away from his marriage with absolutely nothing but the wrinkled suit on his back and a mountain of unsecured liabilities that would follow him for the rest of his life. Destitute and publicly humiliated, the golden child had no choice but to retreat to the only place that would still take him. He moved back into my parents' sprawling Boston suburb estate. But that sanctuary was already crumbling to the ground. Without my pristine credit acting as a reinforced dam, the floodgates of Richard and Brenda's financial mismanagement burst wide open. The fallout was swift and completely unforgiving. By the end of the month, the massive mortgage on the colonial house went into hard default. The bank swooped in with the same ruthless efficiency they had used on Jason's commercial building. The social consequences hit them even harder than the financial ruin. The country club, which was the absolute epicenter of their entire socialite universe, publicly revoked their membership after 3 consecutive monthly dues checks bounced. Word spread through their wealthy network like wildfire. The people they had spent decades trying to impress, the people they had prioritized over their own daughter, turned their backs instantly. There were no charity gala invitations arriving in the mail. There were no polite phone calls offering assistance or sympathy. The aristocratic facade my parents loved more than anything else in the world was entirely destroyed. Richard was forced to officially file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The legal proceedings stripped them to the bone. The court ordered the immediate liquidation of their remaining physical assets to satisfy the angry creditors. The manicured lawn, the heated swimming pool, and the pale blue childhood bedroom I used to hide in were auctioned off to the highest bidder. I watched the public real estate listing go live on my laptop while eating lunch. The house sold well below market value to a commercial developer who planned to gut the entire structure and subdivide the lot. With no money and their credit completely annihilated, Richard and Brenda were forced to downsize drastically. They rented a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city, far away from the affluent neighborhoods they used to rule. Jason took the tiny spare bedroom. He was a 32-year-old failed visionary sleeping on a cheap air mattress in his parents' rented apartment. The tension in that small space must have been absolutely suffocating. 3 arrogant, entitled people who had spent their entire lives blaming everyone else for their problems were finally locked in a tiny room together with absolutely no one left to scapegoat. That was when the desperate phone calls started. I had blocked their personal numbers on my primary phone the moment I walked out of the bank. But they managed to bypass the system by purchasing cheap prepaid burner phones from a local convenience store. The voicemails piled up in my secure digital folder. They were a pathetic symphony of manufactured grief, manipulative guilt trips, and sheer unadulterated desperation. My mother would call in the middle of the night, weeping loudly into the receiver. "Claire, please," she would sob, her voice cracking with theatrical misery. "We have nothing left. The apartment is so small and the heating barely works. Your father is so depressed he refuses to get out of bed. Jason just sits in the dark all day. We are your family. We forgive you for what happened at the bank. Please just call us back. We need your help to secure a small loan for a used car. We promise things will be different this time." I listened to her say she forgave me, and I actually smiled. Even living in a cramped apartment, she still believed she possessed the moral high ground. Richard's voicemails were a volatile mix of his old commanding arrogance and his pathetic new reality. He would start the recording by demanding I wire them $10,000 to cover their bankruptcy legal fees. Then halfway through the message, his tone would violently shift and he would break down begging me to remember the good times we had when I was a child. He tried to gaslight me from a burner phone, claiming the foreclosure was just a minor temporary setback, and that with my new corporate salary, we could easily rebuild the family empire together. Even Jason left a message. His voice was hollow and completely defeated, stripping away the arrogant smirk he had worn at my graduation party. "Claire, I am so sorry," he whispered into the phone. "Simone took everything. The judge gave her everything. I have to take the city bus to a job interview for a minimum wage retail position tomorrow morning. I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to ride the bus. You were always the smart one, Claire. You always knew how to fix things when I messed up. Please, sister, just help me fix this. I am begging you. I walked out onto the expansive glass balcony of my new penthouse apartment. The city stretched out below me, a glittering grid of lights reflecting off the dark, calm water of the harbor. The evening air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint, distant hum of downtown traffic. It was a beautiful, peaceful sound. I held my phone in my hand, resting my arms against the cool metal railing. The screen glowed warmly in the twilight, showing a new notification. It was another voicemail from a restricted number. I knew exactly who it was. I tapped the screen and pressed play, bringing the speaker close to my ear. "Claire, please. I am begging you," my mother's voice poured through the tiny speaker. Her tone was thick with that familiar theatrical misery, the exact same crying routine she had used to manipulate me since I was a teenager. 1 second, 2 seconds. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I did not feel the familiar tightness in my chest that used to accompany her tears. I did not feel the crushing weight of obligation or the desperate, pathetic need to earn her conditional love. I felt absolutely nothing but a profound sense of quiet relief. I tapped the screen and deleted the message before she could even finish her sentence. Then I opened my carrier settings and initiated a complete network-level block on every known number and email address associated with my parents and my brother. It was the digital equivalent of locking a heavy steel door and throwing the key into the deepest part of the ocean. It was finally over. I slid the phone into the pocket of my silk trousers and took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh night air. Looking down at the city, I thought back to that graduation party. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it had only been a matter of months. My parents had rented that elegant country club room strictly to celebrate themselves. They had handed Jason that thick manila envelope in front of a crowd of hundreds specifically to put me in my proper place. They wanted to remind me that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how many corporate law degrees I earned, I would always be second best. I would always be the silent workhorse, pulling the heavy carriage, while the golden child rode inside, waving to the crowd. But their massive arrogance was their ultimate undoing. That was the most beautiful irony of it all. If my father had just handed me the deed to the commercial building like we had legally agreed, I would have spent the next 20 years quietly paying off his hidden debts. I would have sacrificed my own financial future and my own mental health to keep his aristocratic illusion alive. By trying to publicly humiliate me and crown Jason as the visionary heir, they accidentally handed me the exact weapon I needed to cut myself completely loose. They thought they were securing their legacy, but they were actually pulling the pin on a grenade and holding it tightly against their own chests. I turned around and looked through the sliding glass doors into my living room. The space was massive, featuring high ceilings, modern art, and expensive minimalist furniture that I had selected myself. I am 35 years old. I am a senior corporate finance attorney at one of the top firms in the country. I own a multi-million-dollar property free and clear. Every single thing I have, I built with my own 2 hands and my own relentless determination. There is no toxic weight dragging me down anymore. There are no midnight panic attacks about how to cover my brother's fraudulent crypto debts. There are no forced, agonizing holiday dinners where I have to sit quietly and endure their condescending insults about my personal life. I am completely and utterly free. I used to think that setting boundaries made me a bad daughter. I used to believe the heavy lie that my parents repeated every single day, that family helps family no matter what the cost. But I learned the hard way that when people use the word family as a weapon to extort you, they forfeit the absolute right to be in your life. You do not owe your sanity to the people who actively try to break it. You do not owe your hard-earned financial security to the people who recklessly gambled theirs away. True family is built on mutual respect, on support, and on genuine love. It is not a financial hostage situation disguised as a bloodline. I walked back inside, sliding the heavy glass door shut behind me. The apartment was perfectly quiet, wrapping around me like a protective shield. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and walked over to my desk to prepare for my morning meetings. My career was thriving. My investments were secure, and my future was a wide-open canvas that nobody else was allowed to paint on. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, but occasionally you have to hand them the eviction notice yourself. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own future? Tell me your story in the comments. And remember, never set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm.